Hello and welcome everybody. Thank you all for joining us today on this panel discussion on central bank digital currencies in Europe. I'm looking very much forward to this discussion. My name is Hashim Hassan. I'm a financial legal expert at the Danish Central Bank, and I'm thrilled to be facilitating this discussion around CBDC. I would just like to remind everyone that throughout this session, you are invited to ask questions by submitting them into the question panel, and they will have a Q&A by the end of the session. Before introducing you to our amazing panelists, I would like to just set the stage and give you some background info. A vast majority of central banks are researching and actively experimenting with CBDC concepts, both wholesale and retail. And these include a lot of European projects, such as Project Helvetia and the Trigger Chain and Bitcoin, but also extensive research on retail CBDC architecture and cross-border arrangements. Furthermore, the European Central Bank will soon decide whether to launch a digital euro project. So I think it's fair to say that there's a lot of very interesting stuff going on, and especially in Europe. And this will bring us, of course, to the main topic of this panel. Will we have a CBDC in Europe anytime soon? And to answer this question, and lucky for us, we have our great panelists who are also a driving force behind many of these projects and research. So without further ado, I would like the panelists to introduce themselves. Should we start with you, Thomas?
Thank you very much, Hakim. I'm Thomas Moser. I'm an alternate member of the governing board of the Swiss National Bank. I'm an economist by profession. I started first with IT and also took some cryptographic courses during my sabbatical, but I'm an economist. Thank you.
Rafael?
Hey everyone, thank you Hashim for this kind introduction and for inviting me. My name is Rafael Auer. I'm a principal economist in the Innovation and Digital Economy unit of the Bank for International Settlements, and I cover all things cryptocurrencies, stablecoins, and CBDC. It's going to be a great pleasure to be talking here. As always, I'll be speaking only on my own behalf and none of that of the BIS.
All right, thank you. And Anthony?
Thank you, Hakim. Hi, everyone. I'm Anthony Welfare. So I'm the Executive Director for Enterprise at Symbol NEM. So we're a blockchain platform, recently launched Symbol, but also we've had NEM for a while. I've been in this space since, well, a long time. I mean, it's 5-6 years. So in blockchain time or normal time, that's probably 100 years, I think, for normal people. So I've spent quite a few years working with large tech companies, so Oracle and DXC, where I've worked with many enterprise companies and governments on blockchain solutions. So lots of discussions around CBDCs, digital currencies, digital assets, and the whole sort of tokenized world. So really excited to be here to be talking about, CBDC and will we see one in Europe? Very interesting discussion ahead.
Thank you. And the last one, Martin.
Thank you very much for inviting me. My name is Martin Diel. I work with Deutsche Bundesbank. Now I have been working here for more than 2 decades, and half of that time, roughly, I have spent with payments and settlement systems as an analyst, heading a group analyzing payment and settlement system. And half of that time, I have also covered with crypto, token, blockchain, DLT, and now digital money. So that is the focus of my work, and I'm really excited to have that exchange today.
Perfect, thank you. And we're very grateful for all of you for taking part and offering your thoughts on these topics. So today we'll be discussing 3 subjects. First, very brief introduction to the motivations behind a possible issuance of CBDCs in Europe. Then we will discuss what are the challenges that still needs to be overcome based on our panelists' experience and research. And finally, we will discuss whether we could expect an issuance of CBDC in Europe anytime soon. So let's just jump right into the questions. I would like to start with Rafael. Rafael, as we mentioned, there's a lot of projects going on. There's a lot of discussions going on and research. Why are central banks exploring CBDCs? Why don't we just use commercial bank money, cash, coins? Why even discuss CBDCs?
So thanks. That's obviously right. It's not the $1 million question. It's not the $1 billion question. It's a $1 trillion question. And I think especially at an event like the European Blockchain Convention. So when thinking about why central banks are pursuing CBDC, many are tempted to to assume that it's Bitcoin and private sector stable coins that are sort of driving the forecasting technological trends that central banks want to harness, or that are seen as an alternative. But in my perception, it's really the reality is quite different, and it's actually much simpler. And while all this hype around Bitcoin and other projects has certainly been sort of a catalyst of public attention, central banks are ultimately reacting to a much simpler and different development, and that's that cash is being used less and less. It's a wonderful product, it's resilient, it's inexpensive, it's accessible, but people use it less and less in offline transactions, especially since COVID-19, of course, but in an online transaction, you can't even use it at all. And now for a central bank, that's really a fundamental issue, right? They have a legal mandate to supply an accessible means of payment, and for decades, for centuries, and in some jurisdictions for millennia, that has been cash. And so we simply have to think about alternatives. And that's why central banks are researching a digital complement to cash, a direct claim on the central bank in electronic form.
Thank you. So this is kind of a reaction to the world becoming cashless, or at least that cash is being used less and less. Anthony, you have a more technical background, and you've been working with some central banks on different projects. Why is this interesting from a technical point of view?
Yeah, I think it's following on from what Raphael said, that we live our lives with our mobile phones and we make payments for everything. So if you think about most of the transactions you do in your lives now, they're often electronic, be it a direct debit for paying your bills, or be it paying for your petrol or for a meal, etc. So we're already in a CBDC world, in essence, in terms of the use case as humans, and citizens. I know there's still lots of cases of cash, but it's come down drastically, the amount. And I remember in Sweden, there was some really low figures of the actual amount of people that use cash for things. And COVID, I think, changed that a lot and made, we all had to be online. There was no other way to get your food and your shopping. So it really accelerated this. So the governments, the central banks have now said, well, digital's here, what can we do next? And technology is already there. So technology always moves ahead of regulation and sort of governments, etc. And blockchain's been around, let's say 20 years or so, 15, 20 years. You can argue a lot more before. Different people argue different things, but it's a distributed ledger accounting technology has been around for a while, a long time. Bitcoin's been around for a very long time as the originator of some of the technology. But if you look at Ethereum and some of the new platforms that are coming up, like Symbol, that's now taken the technology to where a CBDC actually could make sense and could operate. And there's still a way to go in terms of the scale of this, because this is, a CBDC is big, for Europe, millions, tens of millions of people transacting, this is a big scale project. This is not a small project. So I think the technology is there, especially decentralized technology. It's being tested. And it's been tested to destruction, and in most cases it's not got to destruction, which is brilliant. It's now a case of regulation and processes and people need to sort of catch up. And that's where the interesting part, when we all start working together and bringing together regulation, people, processes with the tech that's already really there.
Perfect, thank you. So we are in a CBDC world where we are reacting to that cash is being used less and less. Then I would like to move on to the next questions, and that would mainly be about your experiences and challenges that still needs to be overcome. I would like to start with you, Thomas. From a wholesale perspective and based on your work with Project Helvetia, what are the main questions that still needs to be answered? And just based on your experience, where are we? What still needs to be done?
Well, thank you. I mean, you mentioned an important point, Hakim, namely wholesale CBDC. So in addition to what Raphael and Anthony said, which mainly concerns cash and retail CBDC, there is also an issue here for central banks on the wholesale side. So currently, central bank money is already available in digital form for banks, and the platforms that we use for the payments between the banks, you know, are so-called real gross settlement systems, RTGS, which have been basically the new technology in the late 80s and 90s. And now the big question is whether the infrastructure of the future will be based on distributed ledger technology. So that's when a central bank then has to ask itself, you know, do we need to get now central bank money somehow on a distributed ledger? And that's exactly what we were looking at in this Project Helvetia that you mentioned. Now, the cool thing about Project Helvetia is that it's not just a research project. It's together with the Swiss Digital Exchange, which intends to go live this year. So we could basically try it out on a almost ready to go live project. So the experience has been, you know, it works very well. We could get the central bank money in the form of a wholesale CBDC onto this DLT that SDX uses, and you know, it has clearly some advantages. And now we go into the next stage of these experiments, and we go now really into the details. We want to check out the end-to-end connectivity. We go into the core systems of the banks. We check performance, security, a lot of details, including also some governance and legal questions that are still open.
Perfect. So we're moving on to the next stage and really digging into the details to see how this is actually going to affect the different actors within the systems. So moving on to the retail part, you published a white paper with the so-called grandfather of cryptocurrencies and based on the different requests, especially within this digital euro consultation, privacy was one of the top features requested. And based on your research within this topic, do we still have some challenges that needs to be addressed within retail CBDC? Because there's both like the technical side, but there's also a lot of policy issues. So what are the main questions that still needs to be answered within retail?
No, thank you for mentioning the working paper that we published on the Swiss National Bank website. Exactly. I mean, these are so basically two issues that we address in there. One is, and I think this is still an issue, Anthony also mentioned it, scalability. I mean, a retail CBDC, that's huge. So there are different solutions to that, but that's clearly one of the issues. How do you get the scalability that you need? Because you have a lot of transactions per second with a retail CBDC. So to that we said, you know, why use a blockchain at all? Despite all the nice things you can do with a blockchain. So that's, I think, one thing that's special about our research paper. We base it on David Chaum's original eCash idea. And then the other issue is privacy that you also mentioned. And here I think that's really an issue that central banks are now investigating, is how can you provide some degree of privacy with a CBDC but still ensuring, compliance with anti-money laundering regulation. And we also provide a solution in our paper. And that solution, if you don't use a DLT, is much easier than if you use a DLT, where using, privacy enhancing cryptography on a DLT and make it scalable, that's quite a challenge. There are a lot of clever people out there, and I'm sure they're working and will find some new solutions, but it's a challenge.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Martin, I would like to ask you more about the retail CBDC side of this. What's your standpoint on this? Do we need retail CBDC? Is it really necessary? First of all, Thomas just mentioned maybe it's not necessary to even use blockchain, but is it even necessary to issue retail CBDC at this point? I think you're muted.
Thank you. I was muted, sorry. I would like to start with a quote by Mark Twain in his famous Huckleberry Finn. There is a sentence which goes like, having lost sight of their destiny, they redoubled their efforts. We have to avoid that situation. There's a lot of effort in central banks and in private institutions and so on, how to use the solution, but we need to answer the question why. Several things have been said why we should issue CBDC. And I'm not sure whether there is really, what is really convincing. The cash case, reducing use of cash, well, this is a private decision of households to use less cash. We have the situation in Sweden where people use very little cash. The same is in Denmark. The Swedish Riksbank has decided we need CBDC to overcome that. The Danish central bank, Danish Nationalbank has said, well, so what? Let's do it. Let's watch it. We don't need CBDC for that. The Eurosystem has published a report on a digital euro in October last year, a report by a high-level task force where we put a lot of effort in, also we in the Bundesbank, and they wrote 8 scenarios. They described 8 scenarios which could be a reason to issue CBDC, but whether they are really a convincing case, we don't know yet. Several have to do with of course, with cash use and the one which was described. One other has to do with surrounding forces. Maybe if private companies, big tech, issue a form of a stable coin, which would become so big that it could interfere in monetary policy or maybe even financial stability, it could be the case that we deem it necessary to issue CBDC in order to overcome that situation. It doesn't have to be. Of course, we have other weapons to defend our case as central bank, as you know, but maybe the best way out of it would be to issue a CBDC on our own. Another point goes more in the direction of Thomas, and it is also described in the report of about the digital euro, the case to support the digitalization of our economy. DLT offers a lot of opportunities. And to be honest, most of those opportunities are mainly for big corporates, for financial institutions. They don't have to do with single households. Not a private household like me. I would not run a node on a ledger in order to deal with money. But if I were a bank, I would like to speed up my settlement. I would like to reduce my settlement risk and maybe use DLT to have an immediate DVP settlement. So we need maybe money on the ledger, but there are also other options than that. So thinking about the wholesale, as Thomas has proposed, is, in my eyes, much more compelling at the moment. Second, if we come to the point that one of those scenarios will apply and we deem it necessary to issue, for instance, a digital euro, then having issued a wholesale CBDC before could help us, having learned a lot. The technology for a wholesale CBDC is much easier to handle because we deal with professionals who know how to run operational risk, how to avoid cyber risk, and so on. So that would help us. And the numbers are much smaller. We don't have to scale into millions. We scale into 10,000 or maybe into thousands, because we're dealing only with the banks who have already access. And that is also another important aspect. The major risks which are claimed to stem from CBDC are coming into existence because CBDC would widen the access to central bank money. Because then there would be the danger that it could substitute for commercial bank money. It could substitute for deposit with banks. And we don't know what that means for monetary policy, for financial stability and other aspects. Wholesale CBDC doesn't bear that risk so much, because we limit it. So I see a lot of argument in favor of starting with wholesale and then looking further whether those scenarios may apply for CBDC. As for the Eurosystem, just to make the case, the Eurosystem will decide in June whether to start an investigation phase, whether they could and what it means issuing a digital euro. And after that investigation case in 22 months or so, in roughly 2 years, the Eurosystem will decide whether to issue. That is the current point, and we support that, of course, from the Bundesbank.
Thank you so much, and many interesting points. And you just mentioned that maybe like a wholesale CBDC would be easier and better to issue, and that wants me to make to ask you. You had the trigger chain project, and with that you used blockchain to as a DLT or DLT as a settlement technology without using CBDC. So do we even need wholesale CBDCs to actually benefit from the technology?
Yeah, thank you very much for pointing that out. Of course, this trigger solution. Let me explain what it means. The trigger solution could be part of the trick to solve, to help our industry, the financial and the real industry, to use DLT and to settle the money lag of big trades in central bank money without needing CBDC. So our idea, it was not only our idea, there were many institutions in the world which had the same idea. How can we link DLT to conventional payment system? The SNB has also the same idea, had in their project Helvetia to make this link, and others, LBBB in Germany, a bank, and I think Everclear in Spain has also done that. They linked it to commercial bank money, to clearing houses. We linked it to Target 2. Well, what does it mean? We have a trade on an asset chain, on a DLT, where you settle security trade, and then you have a smart contract which acts as a virtual trustee. So he keeps the security which was sold by a seller, and he keeps it and blocks it. And then he triggers a payment via a trigger chain, which is run by Bundesbank. And we send this payment instruction to Target 2, where it is settled. And then we send back a signed payment confirmation that the money lag has been settled to that smart contract, which in turn releases the security to the buyer. If we send back, if you don't send back this confirmation or say the money lag has failed, then the security, of course, is released back to the seller, and though the DVP has failed. So in a successful case, we have a DVP settlement in central bank money without creating CBDC. This could be also a very good complement to CBDC. Why? Well, see, we keep the payment system as it is. We use the conventional payment system. We don't change anything. So it's only a technical bridge. We have built this technical bridge in our case in Bundesbank, in Target 2. If we start a real project, we could do it, I would believe, within 9 months or so. It was much faster than any CBDC will be created. So it could solve it. If later on we need CBDC and we create wholesale CBDC, okay, we don't need trigger anymore. Whether they both coexist or not, I don't know. It is certainly nothing for household. It is nothing to substitute for the digital euro in general, because it doesn't solve the retail cases. That's for clear. But it could be a support for our industry to make use of DLT.
Thank you so much, Martin, and many interesting points. We're receiving a couple of questions, and especially on disintermediation of financial institutions, and I think that's a perfect question for you, Raphael, because you've been researching on CBDC architecture and direct and hybrid models, and just in general, how should we design and which kind of design options do we have when we want to issue CBDCs? Do you want to, do you see a one size fits all design, and which kind, what approaches do we have, which design options do we have for central bank money?
So thank you very much. At BS, we do a couple of stock takes on what central banks around the world are pursuing, and one definite answer you can give is that there will certainly not be a one-size-fits-all solution. It's not even clear who will pursue a CBDC, and those jurisdictions that might pursue it, they will pursue quite different options. And to think about them and how they could still involve the sort of the private sector, I think, we first have to be very clear about what a CBDC is. A CBDC is not a technology. Of course, it's digital, but it's a concept, right? It's that, and to think about that concept, we have to think about the difference between cash and digital money that exists today. And the difference is that cash is not a claim on an intermediary, it's a claim on the central bank, whereas any electronic money that exists is a claim on a financial corporation. And this financial corporation might run into illiquidity or insolvency issues. So that is sort of the difference between CBDC and today's existing money, is that the claim would be direct to the central bank. Now, because sort of you have a legal relationship with the central bank, just as you have with cash, people at first thought of as a CBDC as a central bank, fully central bank operated payment and financial system. And that came with big question marks regarding disintermediation and driving the private sector out of their comparative advantage. And such, we call that, you mentioned already, a direct CBDC. So that would really be the central bank offers a central server infrastructure, devices to access it, and people run payments on that infrastructure. And obviously, there is a number of arguments against this architecture. In particular, right, we have a reason why we have today's financial system, and that central banks are good at stabilizing the core, and the private sector is good at interfacing with consumers in an efficient manner, innovating for a smooth payment experience, and that should be the same. So this direct option is not really considered by most jurisdictions. I have to say, an exception is like in small remote jurisdictions where there's really an underdeveloped banking system that is being considered, but it's a niche case. A much more promising design is what we call is the hybrid design, where sort of the private sector, instead of today handling sort of accounts for the clients, just updates the record of which retail client holds which CBDC at which moment of time. So they handle all the customer facing activity, and they handle payments in real time. But the central bank sort of is a backstop to the system, and it maintains the core. And the way it sort of can not only provide better legal protection via the direct claim, so there are no balance sheet concerns, but also some technological improvements is, for example, if the central bank runs a backup system. So for example, imagine you have a payment system with various intermediaries, and then at some point, one of them encounters technical difficulties. What the central bank can do with such a backup system is to take these client relationships that are non-functioning and just switch them to a different intermediary that still has a working infrastructure. Now, of course, there is one caveat to this, which is for the central bank to be able to do that, it needs to have the information on the actual retail client balances, right? Because that you can't restore balances if you don't know what they are. And while so this design offers better resilience, there are question marks as to whether the central bank actually wants to have that data. Many clients do not want the central banks to have that data, but the central bank doesn't want it either, because it could create legal problems, right? The central bank sees no value and it might be sued by some courts to hand it out in some disputes. So a third option is sort of an intermediated architecture, and here it is really only sort of the central bank only knows wholesale balances. So each intermediary has client relationships, and it reports the sum of these holdings by all their clients to the central bank. Of course, now if you have a system like that, then the central bank again needs to have some supervisory mechanism to check whether the private sector intermediaries actually report the true balances, the true sum of balances. So these are sort of the range of architectures that exist, and all of them are being considered. And it's really like, the size of the jurisdiction matters, the how people think about the work split between the public and the private sector matters, and how people think about what kind of information the government should have matters. And that's why we will not see one size fits all, but we will see a variety of these. And again, the disclaimer is we don't even know how many jurisdictions will actually issue a retail CBDC.
Interesting. Thank you. And I have one more question, and that's more Martin was talking about what like linking up different payment systems and payment system interoperability. And I would like to hear your view on multi-CBDC arrangement, but also cross-border. Like we've been talking a lot about retail CBDC and CBDC within one country or one system. But what's your view on spreading the CBDC into different systems and using it across different systems?
So one of the longest standing problems in payments is not on the domestic side, but on cross-border payments, especially for small payments like for remittances. Cross-border payments are far too expensive. They take too long to be processed. The data transmission along this chain and the associated ease of compliance is not very good. And they also have access problems. And there's a global roadmap that's coordinated by the G20, is trying to tackle these issues. There is a number of building blocks, and again, right, there are many solutions, and one of them is CBDC, and those are called, you already mentioned it, multi-CBDC arrangement. And the idea is really that to some extent cross-border problems originate from legacy issues, right? Different countries built their national systems, and the focus was domestically, and then only later people started to sort of connect them across borders, and that created frictions that still exist today because they're very difficult to tackle ex post. So a principal example would just be the clean slate. Central banks around the world are looking into CBDC design, and there is sort of a common agreement that the cross-border dimension should be tackled alongside the development of a domestic payment system. And there is a number of different arrangements of MCBDC arrangement being considered. One is just really this that I just mentioned, is like to coordinate from the get-go. But also other models exist. Some that would be an intermediate level of coordination is when you have different payment systems. Each country has their own CBDC payment system, but they're sort of interlinked with a technical interface. And if you make a payment from retail client A that sits in one country to retail client B that sits in another, the payment is sort of processed through both systems and the interface directly without any middleman being involved. And so this creates technical linkages that can sort of shorten the payment chain and lead to some efficiencies. But of course, you need to coordinate this common interface, and that is a governance problem. It's also a technology problem. You need to bring in a number of stakeholders, given that we say the private sector should have a role in a CBDC system. You do not only need to bring in governments, you need to bring in private sectors from different countries. So there is a number of stakeholders. And integration could even go further in a sense that it's also possible to have multiple CBDCs run on one system. So one payment system really means there is one common infrastructure, there is one common set of access criteria and one rule book. If you are able to pay in CBDC from country 1, then you're also able to pay in CBDC from country 2. It's really one system. There's just an FX market in between these two CBDCs. And obviously then, if such a system is integrated to that extent, basically a cross-country, cross-currency payment becomes as difficult to process as a single currency within country payment. But of course, the downside is that here you really have to have 2 or more countries that need to not only coordinate certain aspects, but they need to agree on having the exact same technical system, and that's going to be very hard. So the takeaway is that there is a variety of agreements, and central banks around the world are coordinating from the get-go to see if they decide to launch a CBDC, how they can also tackle cross-border payments problems. En passant.
Thank you so much. And I think you're making a lot of very interesting points, and especially in regards to governance and central banks agreeing with first of all the technology and who's going to have the responsibility and a lot of different issues. And that takes me to the next question to Anthony. You've been working with central banks, you've been working with technology, and what's your experience in working with these kind of entities? And also, is it even possible to work with central banks and make them use new types of technologies?
Yeah, I mean, it's a difficult one because of the issues, from my fellow panelists. It's not I think when people think about this, they think it's very simple, and you go to the shop, you've got €1 and you just spend it and you're using your wallet, etc. Why can't the banks just do that? Just send it to me. That's it. There's 250 million people or whatever it is in Europe, and probably most people have got a few bank accounts. It's just the scale of this. So it depends on, one, the maturity of the country and the governance. If it's a newer economy, a less developed economy in terms of the Western, then it's easier to do things like CBDC digitally. So a lot of the clients we work with in, say, South America, Africa, etc., they adopt the sort of the phone easily, and they can then transact easier. They don't have expensive, big systems that have been in place for hundreds of years, like the Bundesbank or the Bank of England would have, or the Fed. So it's easier in those. I think working with the central banks, it's very different again. From everybody wants to understand this, for one, as a whole, and two, for their citizens, their people, their businesses. For example, so with Bank of Lithuania and LB coin, that's arguably a CBDC in one way, in terms of it's a central bank that's issued a currency that you can use in a very limited format. So it's using the sort of definition in a way. The point of what LB coin is to test the interface with the humans, with the citizens, let's say. So the CBDC is, or the LB coin, should I say, is a collector's coin. It's a token coin, which is issued on a blockchain, on a private blockchain, but also public. So the point of having public and private is critical here. So the private blockchain is within the firewall of the bank, and then the public blockchain is the one that you and I would interface with, and it's all secure. It's fully, safe and secure, as a central bank would expect. And so you can buy tokens, and you can transfer those into actually a silver coin at the end of the day. So you basically play, you transact on a blockchain, it's gamification of it. And then you get this physical silver coin, which has a value of silver. It actually has a printed value as well, which is important for Lithuania. So it does have value. What that's done is actually shown how citizens interact. And that's really critical. The next stage of the project is actually to start trying out real payments with let's call it like a tokenized euro. It's not an official euro, as we've said, this is years away for an official, but again, it's a trial with a number of citizens, a number of people, to see how they interact. And how do you actually have all your wallets as citizens with the central bank? I mean, the risks and issues there are immense. So how do you deal with wholesale commercial in the middle? And I think that's a lot of the discussion we've had here, and a lot of the challenges which we're going to see moving forward. And I think the other part of why a CBDC is so important is financial inclusion. And that's not just for developing countries, that's for the West as well. So if you think during COVID, a large number of people needed payments to them to support, things that happen, self-employed, elderly people, etc. Most of Europe doesn't have a system where the central bank can give money to the people like straight away. The US has sent out checks. I mean, paper checks. We're in 2021 and we're sending out paper checks, that's old school, really old school, So a CBDC would allow that to happen. It would allow the government to say, I need to give everybody in, Europe 100 euros so they can go shopping, so they can buy the food, so they can pay the bills. That's a really important place to look at, and it would be tracked and traced, and that's the importance. So if they put in 100 million euros, they know that X million arrives, or 100 arrives in my account and in your account, etc. So the technology is there to help the discussions. And for me, the most important thing is to have these discussions. I talk to the Bank of England, City of London, ECB, Bank of Lithuania, a lot of banks in Latin America. They're all very different issues, but actually they're all trying to do it. And what we're trying to say, and sort of Raphael talked about, is there's not going to be one solution for everyone. It's impossible. There's going to be a solution for each, but actually part of what they need to think about is the interoperability or the cross-border. And I think that's where you could get the key to some of the wins, where we say, actually, if we build ours like this as the ECB, as the euro, and we make sure that it can interoperate with the dollar, the pound, the yen, etc., that would help take things forward, I think, quite a lot.
Thank you so much, Anthony. I think it's very interesting to get your view from a more practical side and working with different stakeholders within this industry. Then we're moving to the main question, and Thomas, you mentioned the retail CBDC, how to design one, how to issue one. You mentioned the wholesale part. Martin, the same with you. You've been working with the trigger chain, and it's not CBDC related, but we're all exploring these kind of designs and issues, and Raphael are researching on many of these topics, and Anthony, you are more into the practical side of this. With China, with China's pilot, with the US exploring this topic, also with Christine Lagarde saying that there could be a digital euro within 4 years. Just in general, are we going to have a CBDC in Europe anytime soon? It could be a wholesale, it could be a retail. What's your opinions on this? It's more like forecasting, but what do you think is going to happen within Europe within the next couple of years? And I think it's more open discussion. I would like to hear all of your views on this, and maybe just try to sum up some of the things you've been saying.
Yeah. Do you want me to start?
You can start.
Please go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting one. I'd like to think that the ECB can get something in the 5-year horizon, let's say, give or take, a few years either side, because what China has done is push this agenda very quickly, as you say. And citizens are interacting with the digital yuan, and there's lots of things happening now. It's a very different type of economy, a very different type of country to anything in Europe. So I think there's a lot more complexity for us in Europe than there is there, just despite the fact we're X number of countries and different systems. So I think the will is there. If Christine Lagarde and the leaders have said this, it's definitely there. I know from the technology bit, we've been working on lots of different ideas and different places. So I think the will is there. I think probably needs to be a bit more forward thinking and a bit more risk taking, not risk with money, but risk taking in new ideas. Like what Bank of Lithuania have done. They've tried some crazy ideas in a way. You know, it was a bit of a crazy idea, but it's proving out things. And it helps with the discussion, put it together with, you know, the other guys on this call and their expertise. I think that's where we can get to in 5 years or so, see something like a digital euro.
I mean, let me follow up on that. What Anthony said, I would see it very similarly. I mean, when you say anytime soon, that will not be in the next 2 to 3 years, because as several have said on that panel, it's not just a question of technology. It's a question of governance. It's a question of legal adjustments. So it's quite complicated. And also, I mean, the more important the currency is for the international financial system, the more careful you are. So this is actually a chance for smaller, less international currencies to go first. But especially the big ones will be careful to not create the financial stability problem. But then again, you know, the German economist Rudiger Dornbusch said once, you know, in economics, things take longer to happen than you think they will, but then suddenly they happen much faster than you thought they could. So you can always be up for a surprise, but I think it's realistic to say in the next 2-3 years, do not expect a CBDC in Europe.
Thank you, Thomas. Raphael or Martin, do you have any opinion on this or thoughts on this?
I would be even. Oh, sorry, Martin, please go ahead.
Oh, thanks, Raphael. No worry. Of course, we have a lot of thought on this. To start with, on April 1st, I sent around an April's Fool's Day hawks to my managers and to some colleagues. And I faked a Bloomberg message, and I wrote into the headline that Christine Lagarde had said we will issue the digital euro for the Olympic Games in 2022 in Paris. You know, and still I made it very clear in the subheadline that this was a joke, you know, but still I received calls from people, is that true? And I said, no, it was a hoax, you know. So people believe that is something to refer what Thomas has said. It could go very fast at some point. Well, it will go very fast when you have a decisive situation where you know why to do it and to know how to do it. The question of how must depend on the answers of why. Now, looking into the Chinese case, Chinese have started their project with the digital yuan in 2014, which is a long time ago, 7 years. And it will take also a couple of years for us to solve all the problems we are still facing here. But then again, it is all relative. Chinese has a history of 5,000 years. 7 years is nothing, you know, it's very fast. So once we know why we need to do it, we will do it very fast. Be careful. Our currency is important. I'm not saying that we are more important than the Chinese renminbi or the yuan, but our currency is convertible. The yuan is not convertible. So as Thomas has said, we must look careful to all repercussions on Swiss franc, on US dollar, on British pound sterling, and so on and so on. Issuing a digital euro, which will be extremely successful and may be used in other European countries, could also create some pressure on our exchange rate. We don't want that, you know. There are a lot of questions which we have to deal in cooperation with other major central banks. This will also take some time. The technical aspect, as Anthony has laid out very well, we could do almost everything you want. Privacy or non-privacy, semi-privacy, whatever you want, we could do it. This is possible nowadays, but just make clear, what do you want? This is the most important question. This is a political question. Then again, if we want to avoid the negative implications, as I have mentioned, which stem from the substitution of deposits by a CBDC, then people think about restrictions of the use. A lot of things are possible. But again, if we want to create a currency, the internal convertibility of one form of currency, cash, into the digital form, into the account form, is also very important. Don't create a sub-currency. You don't want to have an internal exchange rate, euro 1, euro 2. A euro must always be a euro. This is not easy to guarantee. Those questions are hard to tackle. But again, once we feel we are forced to do so and we need it, it can go very fast. But well, 2 years are pretty soon. I mean, all of us are old enough to remember that 2 years can just fly away, you know, or 5 years. It's also a very short period.
Thank you, Martin. And Raphael, you had some points.
So I'm just gonna repeat these words of caution that the others have said, right? There is no rush. There is no. It's not a competition. There is a lot at stake because existing systems work well, right? This is something that we learned in the pandemic, how well the current payment system works and how easy it adapts also. The only thing that was necessary, right, is changing the limits for cashless payments, card payments, and then that was right, one policy change by most banks. So existing systems are capable to adapt. Issuing a CBDC comes with a lot of question marks. Central banks are proceeding with caution. That is for the retail side. I'm more optimistic about wholesale CBDC just because, you know, it's a new type of technology of how to execute wholesale payments. It comes with its own set of technological and economic questions when it comes to market design, but it can be sort of right, and it is being tested in Project Helvetia at the Bundesbank and so on. And so I see a much clearer path to that. But I would not put any date on retail CBDC issuance in a major Western economy.
So to sum up, there's not going to be a retail CBDC within the next couple of years, and the most important question to answer is why, not how. And we need to. I think Raphael, you posted something a couple of days ago where you said we were exploring but without breaking anything. And I think that's pretty important that central banks won't, like we are trust, like we live on trust, and we need to move on carefully. And I think that's what most of you are saying. I think we have a couple of minutes left for some questions. I would like to ask you, Raphael. We have a questions about the CBDCs on public blockchains. The question is, CBDC, the CBDCs pilots taken so far, have they been ran on public blockchain? And if not, what is your view on CBDCs for retail on public blockchains? Why aren't we using Ethereum or Bitcoin blockchains?
So not entirely sure what public refers to specifically. I think that, so there are basically three technological choices or options. You could use a permissionless DLT that would use proof of work or proof of stake, like Bitcoin or Ethereum do or aim to change to. You could use a permission version. That is what's being offered by many enterprises, Corda, Hyperledger, and so forth. Or you could use a centralized database, proven systems that have sustained payments for decades. And I think sort of what is very clear is that no central bank is pursuing a Bitcoin-like design. they're just very clear. You start with a centralized setup, right? There is a central value backing, and it just doesn't make sense to add that much decentralization, which has a very high cost, right? We can see that from the CO2 imprint of Bitcoin. There's just no need, right? You either do that because you're in an entirely different in a legal institutionalist setup, or you start with a CBDC and then you add something that's more centralized on top. You could still do a permissioned DLT. So there, instead of having like a centralized system with one intermediary, you have many validators, but these validators are known, right? And here, I think we keep monitoring this. The posting you referred to was one update of our database, and one trend that I'm seeing is the following: people early on, because sort of they learned from they were looking into cryptocurrencies and tried to learn from that, and then the next step was permission DLT, and early on, let's say 2/3 of all trials were on permission DLT, and one third was centralized designs, and now that has flipped a bit, and now we're seeing more and more traditional databases and a payment system being run on that. And where we'll go, that's yet to be determined. But everything is being tried, and I see a little bit of a trend towards centralization.
Can I just add the public-private, just to clarify, because we are a hybrid public-private blockchain. And Bank of Lithuania is built on our platform, so it's public and private. This is a big step forward. This is Ethereum 2.0, which is not there yet, but it's very different to what we've had before. I've been around the enterprise space for 5 years or so. It was always permissioned, Hyperledger, Corda, same for CBDCs. What we realized is you need to interact with people, humans, and a vast number of other people, other entities, let's say, who you don't want on your network. You don't need to permission them. So the non-permission side, the public side, is for entities to operate. Take a supply chain of asparagus, because Martin was talking about asparagus before the call. Asparagus is grown in lots of different places. If we want to track the asparagus, the farmer doesn't need to download a node and run a node. She can just take an app, do a GPS coordinate and send it through to the system. That would be public. The actual manufacturer might want the private data of the pH level, the toxicity, etc. That would be on the private side of it. So public and private. So there's a massive change in the technology now and in the future. And just to go back to Bitcoin as proof of work, Bitcoin is the only one that's staying on proof of work. Ethereum moves to proof of stake. We're proof of stake plus. And there's lots of our friends in the tech community that are different types. So the scalability and efficiency, again, as I've said, the tech is more or less fixed. It's back to, as we said before, what are they trying to build for what reasons, as Martin says. So there are the options now to build public-private hybrid chains for CBDCs, which is where we see a lot of our work.
Thank you so much, Anthony. I think we are running out of time now. Just to sum up, there's a lot of work going on in Europe, and our panelists are, as I mentioned before, are driving force behind many of these projects. I'm sure there's many projects coming the next couple of years, and a lot of research coming the next couple of years. And but the question was, are we going to have a CBDC in Europe anytime soon? The question is no. Now, the answer is no. We will maybe have one, maybe a wholesale, maybe a resale, but not anytime soon. We need to move carefully, and we need to really explore and understand why we want to issue these kind of central bank currencies. Thank you, Thomas, Raphael, Anthony, Martin, and thank you for all your questions. I'm sorry that we couldn't get all the questions to you guys, but I think you covered most of the topics pretty well and answered the questions pretty well. And yeah, that's my final words. And I think back to you, Daniel.